Before you were CEO of 360i, you, way back in 2005, started the firm's social media practice. At the time, people there thought you were crazy. Who are all these bloggers in pajamas? Something along those lines. Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, 360i at the time was a search engine marketing agency, and so we were buying ads on Google, and we saw the blogosphere was really picking up in terms of natural search results, and I said, well, what if we can get these guys to talk about our clients? And people said, well, who cares about what the bloggers think? These guys have no influence. They're guys, I think I was less generous. I might have said guys in their underwear, living in their mother's basements. And we said, well, these guys are the future influence of the world, and consumers are going to take more control than brands. And people at the office thought I was ridiculous. I had a mentor who said, you know what, why don't you try? See if you can sell this to anybody, and if you can, we'll do something with it. And we did, and that was the original, I think they call it now influencer marketing. But that was the start of our social media practice before Twitter was invented, before Instagram was invented. But it's a lot of perseverance and a lot of just telling people to go suck it.
And then in 2012, you were another pioneer when there was the Oreo moment. Can you just tell us about that a little bit? Do people remember this? It was the Super Bowl, there was a blackout, and Oreo really kind of geniusly capitalized on that moment.
Yeah, the Super Bowl had this amazing blackout in the third quarter, and people were sitting around wondering, what to do. So of course, we do what we do when we're bored, which is turn to our phones, or at the time, more computers. And we quickly put together this tweet on behalf of Oreo that said, you can still dunk in the dark, posted it and promoted it, and then called every media outlet we could possibly find and say, hey, look at the internet. There's only one thing going on right now, and it's Oreo. And that was this lightning in a bottle that took off and helped kickstart this terrible phenomenon of real-time marketing, because everybody that tried doing it afterwards, there were a couple of really good ones, but we actually stopped doing it right after that because it was so ridiculously annoying. And so many people did it so terribly wrong. But it was an opportunity to look at a vulnerability, which was this blackout and people having nothing to do, and turn it into an asset, which was really finding white space.
That's something you talk about a lot, have talked about a lot this year, turning a vulnerability into an asset. And that's because you weren't exactly, it wasn't exactly preordained that you were going to become a CEO. You grew up in a way that you described to me was in a bubble. Tell us what you mean by that.
Sure. So I grew up about 15 miles out of New York, so not really a literal bubble, but I grew up observant Jewish, which basically means that you have to live within walking distance of a synagogue. So by default, the idea of a ghetto is a norm because you have to live near a synagogue in order to be able to get to synagogue on the Sabbath, which we observe. We don't do any electricity or go in cars or use the internet or anything like that. And so yeah, I grew up in a bubble, went to school with a bunch of other girls who looked like me, act like me, went to the same restaurants as me. I never went to a McDonald's or watched Saturday morning cartoons or anything like that. And most people grew up, married rich, and had lots of babies. In fact, my dad, walking to synagogue one day, said, you know what would make me really happy, Sarah? He made me grandfather before I'm 40 and married rich. I did neither, by the way.
And you've said to me that you had your first conversation with a non-Jewish person when you were 30 years old.
It was my first professional conversation with a non-Jewish person, yes. I went to a public college. I went to Queens College and definitely met others, but professional conversation, yeah. It took, yeah.
And you had told me that the people in your neighborhood, even where you live today, they have Suburbans, but one Suburban isn't enough to hold all the children, so many have two Suburbans.
Yeah. So yeah, I have two kids, which is really an anomaly in my hood. But yeah, they're like there's this couple that lives, not couple, there's like I don't know, it's like Snow White and like the 14 dwarfs. There's so many of them. There's this rounded driveway, and now they have 3 Suburbans trying to get into this circular driveway. It's insane. Yes, most people tend to have lots and lots of kids.
But yet you pursued this incredible career in advertising, which is really a 24/7 business, one in which accounts are won and lost on wining and dining, and you can't really do that. You have to shut off from sundown to sundown on Friday to Saturday. How has that shaped you as a leader, and how you talk about how those have become assets for you in the workplace and in your role as a CEO? So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's really complicated to be an agency CEO when a lot of the negotiations and discussions and relationship development do happen in restaurants. When you're working on a pitch, you're working through the weekend. So it's not just the clients, but it's also, I'm leading 1,000 people and it's Friday afternoon and people have to work late, either on a client assignment or a pitch. See you guys, I'm gonna go home, light some candles and drink a ton of wine. Like, that doesn't really fly so well. What flies less is when I'm emailing them Saturday night once Sabbath is over and they're really pissed off. But it definitely becomes a tremendous liability when I'm not able to be there in the trenches with the team. And then from a client relationship standpoint, it is most certainly challenging. I mean, I'm in New York. I should be taking clients out to 11 Madison Park or wherever any of these lovely women who you guys are going to have such a great dinner. I will not be joining you. I'll have some sort of like frozen something or other.
So what do you do? How do you build those relationships with the key clients that you need the relationships with, that you have the relationships with? It's
really bizarre. Like you actually get to know people outside of the BS that is our industry. I know it's so novel, right? And one of the things that I started doing, I used to be terribly embarrassed. Like, going to a kosher restaurant is a cultural experience, and not in a good way that represents the tribe, not at all. But I grew up like that, so it's fine for me. And I've always been embarrassed about taking folks to kosher restaurants because it was not the most phenomenal experience. Well, a couple things happened. First of all, there are some decent ones out there, and if anybody's interested, I will be at dinner, just not eating the same thing as you. We do that. But the other thing is, sometimes you just make it into a cultural experience. I once went with the CMO of Enterprise Car Rental all over St. Louis trying to find a phenomenal kosher restaurant. By the way, none. And we ended up.
He thought there was a kosher. He thought he was taking you to a.
He was convinced that there was going to be this kosher restaurant that we'd be able to have a wonderful experience. I ended up going to a dinner with him at Budokan in New York, and then he said, "I'd love to repay the favor because I see you can't eat anything. So when you come to St. Louis, I'll take you for a nice kosher meal." I'm like, that's not happening. And so we literally ended up driving up all over, and we ended up at this dive. And we walk in, and I'm so horribly embarrassed. He's like, "Oh, it's so authentic." I was mortified. But that became a big turning point for me to say, you know what, just embrace it. And
you can have food brought into a regular restaurant, but it has to be...
It has to be double wrapped, heated a certain way, and if any steps in the process end up getting kind of messed up, you can't eat the food, and then you've massively insulted your host. So it's kind of, there are two things wrong with it. One is that there's great risk of it going wrong, and two, it calls so much attention to you, and not in a good way. So there are some challenges associated with that. But I've learned to go with it and just embrace it. And the thing that I think has worked really well for me is the consistency. I think there are a lot of people that when you see something that's not quite like everybody else, you try to either cover it up, or you make excuses, or you find loopholes. And I think one of the things that I've been fortunate is that I've really stayed very true to the value system that I've been raised with. And so it's very clear, like, there are just certain lines that I won't cross. You're never gonna catch me on a Saturday working, and and just because I'm emailing you Saturday night, you don't need to email me back. And I'm never going to be able to eat where you're eating, but they become kind of, those are my vulnerabilities, but they're also my assets because people know that they're dealing with somebody who stays true to their values no matter what that is. And I'll be candid about it. In which case, if I'm going to be candid about that, I'm probably not going to be messing with you in any other way either. And in the ad business, there's a lot of BS. So it actually allows you to be a little bit more transparent, a little more accessible. And when you're vulnerable, other people become vulnerable as well. I mean, look at this audience. I mean, each one of you more impressive than the next. And I can only imagine what cocktail conversation is going to be like. Everybody is so incredibly impressive. But you start letting down your guard. Like I was sitting next to two really nice women, and I'm like, yeah, I forgot to bring jewelry. I forgot to bring cosmetics with me to this trip. And it's like, oh, now we can all talk really freely because we're willing to just be vulnerable about ourselves. But it allows you to establish real, actual relationships with people. By the way, the Neutrogena people are wonderful.
There's a touch-up station back there. Who has a question for Sarah? I think we have time for one question if anybody has one. I certainly have more. If not, over here, right in the front, please wait for the mic and introduce yourself when you get it.
Where was it?
All the way in the front row. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Ghazal, Cisco App Dynamics. So I absolutely loved your story in part because I can relate to it as well. Muslim, raised Muslim, don't drink alcohol, and I spend a lot of time with salespeople that just drink to get drunk. No offense to salespeople around here. But the drinking culture, I mean, it's pretty intense. And for the most part, most of my 20s, I just made excuses until I hit my 30s and thought, no, like, these are my values. This is what I've been raised with. Not drinking means that I am the bubbly person in the morning that's like, how do you feel? You feel terrible. I feel fantastic. So my question to you is, how do you really own and be proud of your value system when you know that in a room of 100, 200, sometimes thousands, you're the only one?
I think being the only one is kind of cool. And it used to not be the case. I've been to so many restaurants, and so just, again, another vulnerability, I love eating. Like, I love eating. And so every time I go to a restaurant and I'm seeing what everybody else is eating, and I'm like pushing a salad around, pretending to eat it, and I'm not even eating the salad, and then I go back to my room and I stuff my face with anything in the mini bar that has a kosher certification, it got really frustrating. And there became this turning point, which was my trek in St. Louis, where I was just like, you know what? It is what it is. And then the only thing that kind of sucks about it is you become typecast. Oh, yeah, she's the kosher one. But you know what? People actually, they're really nice about it. Like if I'm going, I went to Madison, Wisconsin once for a client dinner. This is not when they were nice about it. And I brought my food with me, and the restaurant wouldn't let me bring the food in with me, and the client said to me, sucks for you. And I was like, I will never work with this person again.
Oh.
Flip it, yeah, it happens, whatever, you know, like the world is not, you know, perfect. But I said I will never work with her again, and I did not. But then conversely, there are times that I have an opportunity to go somewhere else, and the client will say to me, Sarah, can we go someplace where you can eat? So once you know, then you can get comfortable with it, so nobody's, you know, trying to shove a drink down your throat. So credit to you for just owning it.
We just have a minute or so left, but you have a son and a daughter. You know, your role as a working mom in your community was so outside the norm. Your mom and your grandmother were not supportive of it until you became CEO, you told me.
Yes, yeah, all of a sudden, my daughter is a CEO. Up until then, why are you working? She's gonna hate, thank God she can't live stream.
Do you think that your daughter sees you as a role model, and what are her aspirations, or do you think
I'm really incredibly proud of my daughter. Actually, the reason I didn't bring anything with me, like all that other stuff, is I came here just directly from Israel, where I was visiting my daughter. She's doing a gap year between high school and college. But when she's done with that gap year, she's going to NYU. And she has such tremendous aspirations. She wants to change the face of politics in DC. She was terribly struck by, sorry, I don't mean to get hyper-political, but she was terribly struck by the outcome of the election. She was so idealistic and thinking that things were going to change. And she's a very empowered, observant Jewish woman, and I'm super proud of her.
That's great. Sarah, you have a lot to be proud of. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thanks, Lee.